switching to soup basics. So I put a couple of definitions of soup basics because this is a good way to use as a base for a million other things in the kitchen and other dishes, for sauces and stews and all sorts of flavor that you want to add. A mirepoix is a very basic, French, as you can imagine, but it's your very basic carrot, onion, celery. So a true mirepoix, no, there's no salt, no, we're not adding anything else in there. It's just those 3 ingredients, and you want to make it like you're making a soup, because then you can take that, and that's a base for a soup, a stew, maybe a really thick sauce. And that's why mirepoix is great. A puree is if you're gonna cook it, you're done cooking, now we've put it in a blender and we're making it into baby food. That's a puree. A stew is usually gonna be chunky. You can see and identify every vegetable in there. When you're doing chunks, it's about the same type. It doesn't mean all stews have to have meat in them, but typically, traditionally, we think of those as our beef stew with the big chunks, or chicken stew with big chunks in it. But you can make that vegetarian as well, with just big chunks of your vegetables and flavoring. So, a vegetable stock, we talked about how to make that with those vegetable scraps, where you're literally taking the ends of all your, maybe your zucchini and your celery, and you're boiling it and making your vegetable stock that you can use as a base for anything. I like to use that actually in place of water when I'm making grains and rice, because then you have just enriched your rice and your grains with way more nutrients and way more flavor. And I like to do it with the vegetable stock because it's a subtle, usually a subtle flavor. Just be really careful about vegetable stock if you have really spicy ends of things. So if you have the peel of ginger, okay, that's spicy. Know that that's going to spice up your thing. So I usually leave that out of my stock bag in my freezer, and I just put the really plain Jane stuff. Other than onion, garlic, paper, and ends, I'll put those in there. But that's it for spice, because I want to be able to flavor whatever my dish is how I want it. Sea veggie stock. This is taking seaweed. Seaweed has some very different, unique nutrients that you don't get from other stocks or vegetables. There's a whole lot of, just a plethora of different types of seaweeds. And you can get them in giant strips, you can get them in sheets, you can get them in little bitty flakes that are dried. Any dried form, or fresh is great if you can get fresh. Any form at all, you can make a stock out of, just like with the vegetable stock, you're putting that in. And just know that any sea vegetable or seaweed is gonna have some salt to it. So you're gonna use a little bit less salt in your recipe. Is it gonna be fishy? Well, a little bit, yeah, without the fish. It will. But that, you can use that in your recipe to your advantage, what you're looking for. It gives more iodine usually, which is great for the thyroid. So these are ways that you can get different nutrients in you. And then again, I will literally bring it to a boil, let it do its thing, pull it, take all the stuff out. Usually if I'm doing a sea stock, I will do strips of kombu or wakimi. Or if I just have the dried on the shelf, I will do at least a third of a cup to about 2 gallons. And that way you know how proportion to get enough flavor in there for what you're looking for and how to use it. A bone broth is gonna be using any meat bone, so chicken, beef, you can do it with elk, venison, you name it, any bones. So you're gonna take most all the meat off, take the bones, put it, I usually took, let's say chicken carcass, just to give an average size so you understand proportions. A chicken carcass would I fill 3-gallon stock pot with water with a chicken carcass of just the bones. And if you add just, even if it's a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar, just a tiny bit, then it will help leach more of the minerals and calcium from the bones into the water and the broth, giving it more calcium and nutrients. You don't want a whole lot, or yeah, you're gonna have apple cider vinegar flavor, and that's not what we're after. We're just after something to get more minerals from it. I will bring it to a boil, turn it down to a simmer, and I do mine 12 hours. You can do it 24 hours. Usually there's different things that'll do. You can do a 6 to 12 hour and it has more gut healing, or you can do 24 hour and it has more bone healing. So it's really what you're after as to how long you're gonna do it. Let it cool off, strain the bones out, and then again, the bone broth I will put in either pint or quart jars, so it's proportioned and I use it. So when people are sick at my house, I usually eat plant-based, so I don't do the bone broth, but I know my kids do, and they will ask for chicken soup with rice. I don't put any chicken in it, it's literally just chicken broth, rice, and then I got my veggies, and I'm doing tons of garlic and all the healing things that are in there, and cook it that way. Again, just like with the vegetable broth, you can do any of your grains and rice with the bone broth or sea veggie broth, and it gives more nutrients to your dish. So, soups and stews, just that little bit of ideas for tips. When you want to time that, again, like we talked about, seasonings need to cook down. Sometimes things in your soup don't get added until later. So if you're doing a 20-minute rice or a 20-minute pasta in your soup should go on for an hour, hour and a half for all the flavors to get together, and it's the last 20 minutes you're adding those in. So your rice, your grains, your pasta, that goes in the last 20 minutes according to the cook time. Lentils, that's more like 15 minutes maybe, the last bit. If you have beans that have already been cooked and then added, they're pretty hardy. They can handle most of that cook time. If you are cooking with greens, which I highly recommend experimenting with, adding greens to your soups and stews, because it's an easy way to get those nutrients back in you, but they don't get put in until like the last 5 minutes. That's the most you want from them, because you want more nutrients from those greens, unless you're using greens with flavor for flavor. Mustard green, arugula, the radish tops, that is different, because that's you're actually using as a seasoning. But the kale and your spinach and your chard, collard greens, chop them up, last 5 minutes. That's when they'll go in. When I make soups, I put the lid on because I want all that flavor to stay in the pot. I'm looking for flavors to stay together. Unless you are doing like a roux or something where you're going to make it thicker, and that's a whole different thing. But if you do add too much water and you've watered your soup down too much, then you can leave the lid off, bring it to a boil to boil off some of the water and make it a more concentrated flavor, and that will help make it not so weak. So that's another tip you can do for soups and stews. Sometimes I will take a soup, and if it's very, very thick, I will actually boil off some of that water intentionally, make it thick, make it into a puree, and I call it gravy, and I put it over my carb lovers pastas and rices and whatnot, and I just have all sorts of different flavored and colored gravies. They don't know what they're eating, but people sometimes have a tendency to go, yeah, I'll eat gravy if they're not a soup eater, but it's still a way to get all the good nutrients in there and balance it out a little more, a few more veggies in there. You can use juicing pulp in your soups. Just know that it does, it's more fibrous, and so you don't want to do too much of that. You can even make you can make a vegetable stock out of the juice pulp, but when you go to strain it out, it's a lot to try and strain, and there's some chunks still behind, so just know it's going to have this chunkiness to it, a lot more fiber to it, so it's going to soak up a lot more water when you go to use it proportionally. We already talked about what to do if you oops. So a soup, a roux, and a stew, what is the difference and how would you use them? When you're making, I always do this with mirepoix. This is why I have a recipe here for all of them in mirepoix form. So carrot, celery, remember we talked about that. So your carrot, onion, celery in a soup is carrot, onion, celery, water, and now we've added salt. Nothing but that, because you can go a lot of directions with that as a base. Take that same thing and make it into a roux Instead of as much water, you're cooking it down. Usually a very traditional roux will add butter or, well, yeah, it's usually quite a bit of butter to thicken it and give it more fat. If you don't do dairy, you can use coconut oil because you're looking for the fat. Avocado oil. It's still, I've done roux with it just fine. And then a little bit of flour. So I usually use a thickener flour like arrowroot starch, tapioca starch. You can do wheat flour. I stay away from that because it's so inflammatory causing that I will choose something different. Those are a little starchier, the ones that I named, so it's going to be a better thickener. Those are a great base for a gravy. So now you have the base in the beginning for flavor that up to any true gravy, and it's really thick and rich with the fat in there. A stew, you're going to use your carrot, onion, celery, your water. You're going to add chunks of vegetable or meat, your option. You're going to add flavor. Now we're doing some garlic and some clove, and you can see tons of chunks in there. So that is the difference between a soup, more watery, a roux, thick like gravy, and a stew, chunky. But different applications of what you can do with them. I have a page here on greens, and I'm not going to go over all of it, but greens, people have the hardest time eating greens, but they have the most nutrients in them. So this is where we get the most from our vitamins and minerals right here from these greens. The darker leafy green, the better, the more nutrients. So I really encourage people to start exploring with them. That's why I say put them in your mashed potatoes, put them in your soups and stews, put them in your gravies, in your sauces as much as you can. And that's why I've kind of highlighted here the nutritional fiber. I just put fiber, calcium, and iron in there just so you can get an idea. Hey, I had no idea that dandelion greens have so much calcium. Who knew? I throw those weeds away. Yeah, so this gives you an idea that mustard greens, oh my gosh, so much flavor. Yeah, so much calcium. Collard greens too. So this is a great way to get more from them. And just another hint, if you want to get the most amount of calcium out of your greens, do an infusion in apple cider vinegar. So apple cider vinegar, add any of those greens to it, and then flavor it how you want. Add onion, add garlic bits in there. Let it sit on the shelf for 6 to 8 weeks. Then you can take all the the greens out and the chunks of stuff, and use that flavoring in salad dressings or in your cooking, and it will give you about 7 times the amount of calcium, because that is what the apple cider vinegar does, is take all the calcium it can. Now it's more bioavailable and your body will take it like that. If you have an osteoporosis, osteopenia problem, you need more calcium, you can literally just do a tablespoon of that and you will not believe how much calcium is in that. So these are just little hints that these greens will give you. I did kind of highlight what each green will give you. You can look at it and see. I'm trying to motivate you to go explore. With chard, just my little tip, chard has that stalk that looks like celery, so yeah, use it like celery. I literally dice it, saute it just like celery. Tastes pretty much like celery, but it has different nutrients in it and more nutrients than celery. And that's why I like it. My family just think it's celery, unless it's the rainbow, color. And then they go, what a funny color, celery. Yeah, sure. It's actually really good for diabetics too. So this is something good to explore and play with. So the next section has tons of recipes. I'm not going to go over every one of these recipes because you can read clearly, but I'm going to highlight a couple of them to give you ideas of how you can substitute and play with these a little and alter the recipes. So the first recipe is creamed mustard or spinach greens. And I try to make most of my recipes where they have the option of dairy-free. People know what to do with dairy. If you consume dairy, it's easy. It's when you're dairy-free it gets harder because you feel like you're missing the fat. and the flavor. So you don't have to miss the fat or the flavor in these recipes. So I've put together really good seasoning and spices, but you can add any green to that mustard and spinach green recipe. I've done that with just chard. I've done it with just collard greens. I've done it with arugula, more flavor, but cook it and it takes the bite off. You can, I'm just gonna tell you right now, people who don't like greens, if you don't like greens, you might want to double this recipe because it's better than you think. In my house, it's the first thing that goes in. I'm telling you, I've got some picky eaters. They like it. The flavor is amazing. The yucca simmer. This is yucca root. Yucca root is cassava. It's known by a couple things, tapioca. It is a root that is used more in Cuban cooking, or other cultures cook with it more. We don't do much with it, but it's a good alternative to potato. It doesn't have as much sugar, still has some. It's still there. But you take the peel off just like you would a potato. You're not going to potato peel it. You're going to cut it off because it's a more thick, fibrous outside. But cut it off. And then this is a great way that you can do all sorts of things with it. I like to make fries out of it. My kids love those fries way better than potato. And I bake anything at my house. Fried means baked. I don't fry. But you can literally do minced garlic, olive oil, sea salt. That's it. And it is awesome. I did that on the Food Network show that I competed on. And yeah, the judges loved it. It's really good and simple. And it only takes really 20 minutes to do it. As long as you don't have super thick chunks and they're actually fry size, then yeah, they're good. If you're not good at matchsticking, I matchstick mine, but you can do it as chips too, and do it in rounds and bake them. And again, then it's a side for your salad, sandwich, whatever. Yeah, the flavors there will also go well with sweet potato, any other root that's a little starchy but not potato. If we're trying to do less sugar, then you can use those same flavors. I did have the rosemary root bake here, so when I was telling you earlier about let's do some beets and what do I do with turnip, well, add it with rosemary. This is an example of that recipe, and you can do that for any root vegetable. Add kohlrabi in there, any oddball thing you're not sure, radish, absolutely, daikon, yeah, because when you cook it, again, it takes the bite off. Add it in there and flavor the heck out of it. With my rosemary for this one, I will either pulse it down or full-on powderize it, but it just depends on what you're looking for. That's how I like to use it. Parsnips pair really well with carrots. So I will do a soup out of it. I will make stews out of them. I will do the root bake out of them. But this is just an example of how you can do an orange carrot parsnip recipe. A little bit different flavors there. I'll do it with, and it's got an orange glaze sauce that goes over it on top, which is really good. So parsnips are a little more earthy. Actually, carrots, the original carrots were the yellow ones, not the orange ones that are sweeter. Yay us, we want sweet, right? We've changed our taste buds to sugar, and that's why we pretty much just farm and harvest those orange ones. The red ones, the purple ones have more nutrients, different nutrients, more beta carotene. The white ones, or the original carrot, they're more bitter. But our taste buds aren't used to that. But it's really actually better for the pancreas and the gallbladder than the orange ones. So try to mix up and play with rainbow carrots if you can. I recommend the first few times mix them so you have some of those sweeter orange ones in there, and then you won't notice. But I do that with parsnips. And that's why I have a nice little orange glaze sauce that you can play with to try on top of that. Carrot butter. I love this recipe, and most people who try this go, oh my god, I could put that on 1,000,001 things. I want that in my fridge at all times. Literally steamed carrots, and I mix mine with coconut oil. That's it, other than sea salt. It is very simple. I put it in the